Okay, thank you so much for the opportunity to be able to come talk to you. Jim will come back out here in a second, but before he does, I just wanted to say how much I appreciate the opportunity to come and talk at the McAleese Conference, and how much I appreciate what Jim does. He didn't pay me to say this, but when I think about the context of everything that's going on and how important that context is in the uncertain time that we're in, Jim really offers a service to us in the national defense space, and I really appreciate that. And I do have to say, when he comes back, I'll rib him a little bit. But when I saw where I was on the schedule, following 3 Joint Chiefs and in between General Brown and General McConville, I thought a lot of things. One of the first things I thought about, it's a really good time for a restroom break and get your coffee. So don't worry, that's not going to bother me. I totally get it. I've been at these things before. But I'll try to fill our time with some important observations about where we are right now, and certainly coming on the heels of what General Brown said and going into what General McConville is going to say. One of the things I can say is how fortunate I feel to have leaders like them who allow for the cooperation and the collaboration across the service lines. Let me tell you, I'm involved right now in planning Project Convergence with the Army. And that's actually pretty cool, right? Because this is real joint experimentation. We have a great working relationship between Air Force futures and Army's futures, and that's really important for the entirety of the joint force where we go. And so that's something I just appreciate. And it wouldn't happen without the leadership of folks like General Brown and General McConville. That's true. It's really happening today, and so we're really fortunate to be able to have that. I brought something that I thought you might find interesting. So many of you know Secretary Kendall, my secretary, the Secretary of the Air Force, and he's going to come wrap up the conference today. And one of the things I've got to not do is contradict anything that General Brown said or get out in front of anything my secretary is going to say. So I'm going to do my best to do that today. But I wanted to show you something. Our first staff meeting of 2022, we do staff meetings, and we were doing it on distributed through video conferencing because the Omicron variant was hitting the Pentagon hard, and we were doing our best to keep everybody safe. And so I'm sitting at my desk at home, and I'm listening to our secretary. It's the first time he gets to talk to us in the new year. And he said, "Get out your stickies, your little sticky notes. I want you to write something down. War with China and possibly Russia is not unlikely. Put that up on your computer screen." It's looking pretty prescient now. This was before we knew what was going to happen in places like Ukraine and before we knew some of the things that were happening around the world. And yet this was on his mind, and I think what he wanted us to take, certainly what I took away from it, was a sense of urgency, that there is a sense of urgency. I think you feel that when you hear General Berger and General Brown talk, and I think you'll feel that when you hear my secretary talk. And he is certainly infusing a sense of urgency to us inside of the department. And it's something we feel pretty deeply. And current events only make that more palpable. So he is going to talk about the operational imperatives and some of the drivers behind those. Many of you have heard those. He had a chance to talk about those last week at the Air Forces Association, the warfighting conference that we had. I know many of you were there. I'm going to talk about that more here in just a second. But I do think it is important to understand the context of what those operational imperatives are all about. And so I heard my commander-in-chief the other day say in front of the entire world, we will defend every square inch of NATO. That better mean something because NATO they're real threats. And so when we think about the operational imperatives, let me just kind of go through what I think about it. When I see what's in front of me in the news, and when I'm thinking about what we're learning as we observe what's happening. If we're going to defend every square inch of NATO, we're going to have to continue to have access to space. If we lose access to space, the joint force loses its coherency. We are not able to see, we're not able to communicate, and we're not able to execute the way that we need to be. By the way, Russia needs it too. And so it's important that we are able to have access to a resilient space architecture. But, as many of us know, our space architecture is not terribly resilient right now because it was fielded at a time when it wasn't necessary, and we were very efficient, but maybe not so resilient. And so this is an important part, and certainly what the Space Force is meant to do. I know General Raymond talked about that earlier today. If we're going to defend every square inch of NATO, we had better be ready to scale up our fires and be able to find, fix, and attack what needs to happen. So what is important here is that we realize that this thing that we call joint all-domain command and control, that's not just something that it's a nice word or a nice phrase, or it is a necessity to be able to do the things we think we're going to have to do, i.e. to be able to see all of the different targets that are out there, do something about, make decisions on them, do something about them, and attack them. Some of those will be with long-range fires. Some of those will be cyber fires. Some of those would be short-range fires if we get close enough. But all of them are important. They all have to come together. And I don't see a way for us to win without all-domain command and control. Now, that's hard. I think the Russians are finding it pretty hard. All-domain command and control is difficult. And it's especially difficult when you deal with the many different aspects of fog and friction that we see in warfare today.
Sorry, sir.
No, you're good, Jim.
Pretend I'm not here.
No, I get it. I've already said they're free to go to the restroom and take a coffee break, you know, so. I did. Yeah, right. So anyway, it's really important for us to be able to think about projecting air superiority. I think that you see that in a tremendous way right now with what's going on. And yet what we see is our overmatch in air superiority is waning and wasting. And that's not okay. And this is one of the things that we have to address. That also includes the ability to take off to be able to generate air power from places and roadways and different parts of the battle space. And that means you have to be able to disaggregate and aggregate. And that includes command and control. So now you're starting to see how these things work together. You're also going to need to be able to hold the depth of the battle space at risk. That includes really deep targets. It doesn't mean that we're going to choose to do that every time, but it means that your enemy needs to respect that in order to be able to take care of, for us to be able to influence the operations. And then finally, we have a lot of systems that we rely on to get from here to there, and then once we're there, to execute. And many of those systems are vulnerable. Some are physically vulnerable, some are vulnerable in cyberspace, some both. And closing up those vulnerabilities is key, or else you're never even going to get to the battle space. And so I just went through all 7 of the operational imperatives, and I just talked about how they kind of fit together in a situation like what we're seeing right now in defense of NATO. And that's why it's so important. It really is, but they're imperatives, meaning we've got to get after these because they're not things that we have solutions for now. And that gets me to the last part as I wrap up here. I had a chance to go to the AFA Warfighting Conference. I saw many of you. I'm seeing some familiar faces out there. Thank you for the opportunity. What I was able to do is I spent every hour that the vendor floor was open, I was meeting with one of our great companies in our defense industrial base. And I thought what I might do is give you a debrief about what I heard and what I learned. and some of the frank conversations that were happening. First of all, thank you for the frank conversations. There was some good feedback coming back to the government. I appreciate that. We can't be nice with each other. I mean, we can be cordial, but it's important that we're able to talk to each other in ways that are meaningful. And we did. That was awesome. And let me just tell you some of the things that I saw and some of the things that I heard. I'll start with this. I'm really impressed with some of the ways that our great companies are moving the ball forward in their technological spheres. Many of them are doing things with their investments that are really pushing the boundaries, doing things that weren't in any requirements document, that they're thinking through what does their particular company offer and what are some of the technologies that really move the needle. I'm pretty impressed with that. Thank you. Yes, sir. I'm pretty impressed with that. And I'm excited about seeing that. I just want to say one, thank you. Because that stuff doesn't necessarily show up on the quarterly earnings statement, right? And I appreciate that these companies are thinking about pushing the envelope forward when it comes to what they can offer to tomorrow's warfighter. And in many cases, I found this to be fascinating. They had to do it through innovation cells that were in some ways out of the mainstream of their corporate cultures. Now, I know a little bit about this. One of the things that General Brown has taken on inside of the Air Force is this idea of combating bureaucracy. I get this. In fact, there was an article that came out yesterday. You sent one out that basically said he had asked me to take a look at it throughout the Air Force, and then he said, "Yeah, we didn't give him enough horsepower." Well, basically, it was my boss calling me out in the press, saying that I hadn't done enough to attack bureaucracy inside the Pentagon. So I have to own that as a 3-star. I wasn't able to change Pentagon bureaucracy. So sorry. I'll do better next time. Inside of these companies, they're having to do things like wall off their innovation cells so that they don't get swallowed up or they don't get snuffed out by the corporate cultures. I thought that was fascinating. And frankly, we're seeing the exact same thing. There's a reason why the organization that I get a chance to lead, Air Force Futures, is kind of walled off and protected, and it's because that corporate culture has the ability to take us down. Second, I found that in almost every case, there was an appetite for increased communication and iterative communication about what the vendors could offer versus what the warfighter needed, and understanding the context of the warfighter and being able to even talk directly with warfighters. I totally get that, and I think that makes a lot of sense. You're going to hear me follow up on that here in a little bit. But I want to say two things. One, I heard the concerns about the security stuff. So yes, a lot of our warfighting planning right now is done at the top secret SCI level plus special access level. And I get that is a difficult classification level to work at. Believe me, it is. There aren't that many rooms in the Pentagon where we can plan. And if we can't do it in the Pentagon, where are you going to do it? So we get it. And one of the things I'll tell you is we've heard you, and our secretary and our chief have both taken this on to make it better. It's not something that's easy. There's no easy fix in figuring out how to share this, but it is important that we have our great companies understanding what it is we're planning to, what the assumptions that we are making look like, and so forth. The other thing I'd say is this. I work the requirements on behalf of my chief. I don't know what warfare looks like in 10 years. Sorry. I've got good insights, and I think I have access to some of the best information that there is. My team has done the best job they can of winnowing down all of the different insights from different points of analysis, modeling and simulation, war games and such. But we expect to be disrupted. We expect to be surprised. And that implies some degree of iteration as we think through what is required to win with the warfighters going forward. And that implies a conversation. We'll talk about that more in just a second. Number 3, I asked specifically about the operational imperatives that our secretary had basically just given a major keynote talking about the operational imperatives, and many of the companies that I talked with had answered requests for information that came on those operational imperatives. Thank you for doing that, by the way. So I asked for specific recommendations and some feedback, and I heard several things. One, it was a hurried process, and we will be the first to say, yes, it was a hurried process. That sense of urgency has really taken over, and we're working really fast to be able to get to the next thing and then the next thing. But totally valid that it was a hurried process. Second, there was a sense that there was some stovepiping between the operational imperatives, i.e. that we were asking for one thing here and maybe asking for kind of the same thing but in a different flavor over here. I think that's probably true as well. And I'll say that what you will get the chance to see is that we're going to try to bring that together in some fora that are coming up and do a better job of telling you how these things are related. And then the third thing I heard, and it wasn't just one company that said this, they said that, well, in fact, it seemed like you already knew the solutions. And let me just say that that is not true. And that's on us if that's what was perceived. But we are looking for your best efforts. This is something that Secretary Kendall believes deeply, that in many cases, the great companies of our defense industrial base have invested their own time, their own resources, and that understand things that we don't. And we need to understand what you are seeing. We need to be able to take advantage of your work and bring it together. And that's clearly where his heart is at. It's clearly where we are at. And so what I'll say as I get ready to close and take your questions, the conversation is only beginning around these operational imperatives, and there's going to be a lot more coming. What you can expect is that next week, March 14th through 16th, we're going to host a forum. We're going to tell you where we are at with each of the experimentation around the operational imperatives. And then in April 25th and 27th, hosted by CSBA, we're going to have a requirements go around where we're going to be able to tell you, debrief our war game called Global Engagement 21. It's a very interesting war game, happened to be a European scenario, and we got a lot of great insights out of that, and we want to be able to share that with you. And then we want to work through some of these requirements questions, like what would it look like if we needed this type of capability, and what would be some of the trades that come with that type of capability. We think it's really important to continue this conversation, and I really am thankful, Jim, for the opportunity to have that conversation and the forum that you provide here to be able to do that. It's important for our future airmen, our warfighters of tomorrow, and they need all of our best efforts. And you saw what my chief said about the problems. There are a lot of problems. We are up to our eyeballs in problems, and that's part of being a leader in this world. But it is important that we get to the solutions, and we want, just like what General Berger said, there's this great nexus of capability of dealing with these problems. We want to be part of that conversation, and we want to promote it going forward. So with that, happy to take any questions that you might have. Yes, sir.
As the microphones get out into the audience, can I throw out the first one, sir?
Of course.
So the chief had alluded to that you're up to your eyeballs in problems, and some problems are closer to the wolf than other problems, and not everybody was going to be happy, I think was the polite reference at the end. From a China fight, what are the missions that have the highest risk currently that will require the greatest resourcing just structurally? And from a China fight, which are the buckets that have the lowest risk and would necessitate the lowest amount of resourcing in the immediate future?
Yeah, that's good questions, and there's there are a lot of ways I could go with that, but I'll go with one and one. So one of the areas where we clearly are concerned is the area of generating combat power, not just air power, but a lot of different forms of military power from infrastructure that's really important. So this would include air bases that have fixed runways. It would also include ports because it's really important to be able to go and reload things and be able to go sortie back out. And it would also include things like storage depots. And those are all pieces of infrastructure that exist in Europe, in the Pacific, that have to be protected, or you have to be able to operate without them. And so one of the areas where there is a lot of unrealized risk, or certainly a lot of unmitigated risk, is in the area of generating power from infrastructure. And so we've got to figure out how we're going to do that. You heard me talk about disaggregation and aggregation, and the ability to spread out so that you can take a punch and then be able to come back in and be a team again. And that takes a tremendous toll on your command and control. You better have command and control down if you're going to do that disaggregation and aggregation part of the fight. And so, so that's an area where it kind of includes all of the joint all-domain command and control. It includes logistics under attack. It includes protection, fires protection. And then you can't do any of your long-range fires projection without the ability to project it off of that critical infrastructure. An area where we see a very different way forward is in the area of getting to the fight. Many of you understand, I know that we had some logistics concerns under, we asked General Berger that. Totally agree with his assessment that logistics is a fundamental part of the joint operations going forward. So one of the things that I think we have to really think through is it doesn't seem like the idea of the flow, opening up the major flow of things across the ocean to get there in time to stop whatever it is our adversary has initiated is likely to close in the time that you need it to. And so this is where, if you're a logistician in this world, you are King Kong. I had a logistician who was assigned to the State Department yesterday. She came over and we had a talk with her boss. And it was great because we were saying, if loggies don't get their due after this war, after watching what's going on with Russia inside of Ukraine, boy, something's wrong. Every loggie needs to walk into the room like they own the place, right? Because it's so important. But you have to think about logistics differently. We have been thinking about just-in-time logistics like many of our companies do, and that's not likely to be okay. And so in so many ways, we have to rethink logistics. If we do that, I actually think that the risk level of that can go down quite a bit. But it is important that we think about things like pre-positioning, spreading out, disaggregation, basically flowing your force levels over a long period of time, as opposed to trying to wait until the last minute and get there, get on the ground, and be ready to go. Because it seems like that's unlikely going forward.
Got a question over here.
Hi, sir. Brianna Riley with Inside Defense. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good, thanks. Congressional appropriators have included a $60 million increase for the ABMS program in the language that was released early this morning. And that's obviously notable considering last year this year for FY21, right, nearly halved the program. Do you think this increase, should it go through, right, marks a show of confidence from Congress in the ABMS program? And can you talk about how we got here? Thank you.
So I think the how we got here part is a very important part of your question. Many of you are familiar with the overmatch brief that went to Congress several years ago. If you're not, the introductory chapter of my friend Chris Brose's book, The Kill Chain, talks about what happened, which felt like a small thermonuclear detonation that went off in Congress when they found out that we were 0-18 in our most certified, most accurate war games against Russia and China. And that's not cool, to put the technical term on it. So what we ended up doing is we had to think differently about combat power and about how to do things like defense and mount a denial defense and things like that. And one of the first things that came to the fore was the idea that you could not isolate domains and win. And this got to the point because many of you understand right now, if we went to war today, we would do it as a joint task force. And there would be components. And those components would look like an air component, and a space component, and a land component, and a special operations component, and a maritime component, and perhaps some sort of joint civil affairs division. And you would have on and on and on. And in many cases, they would be talking over the phone. Well, that's not okay. So this got into the whole idea of joint command and control across the domains. And at first, I think it was difficult for us to say like what we were really buying, because what were we really buying? It was more of a theory. And one of the things that I think this shows is that it's getting more real. It's getting more defined, and we're getting more confidence in Congress in the idea of joint all-domain command and control, as well as the specifics of joint all-domain command and control, and that's a good thing for tomorrow's warfighter. So.
Okay, yep.
Hi, sir. It's Brian Everstein with
Hey, Brian.
Aviation Week. Good to see you again. I was hoping to follow up on two of the operational imperatives that Secretary Kendall touched on last week, the defining the family of systems for NGAD and B-21. There were some very small details that came out, and one thing that the Secretary talked about was a price tag looking at about half the cost of a B-21 or an NGAD for an unmanned teaming aircraft. Can you talk any about the thinking behind this? How is that affordable to one buy and to even be attritable or able to be sacrificed?
Yeah. So what I'll tell you what. The price points of the autonomous aircraft right now are all over the place, and that's probably a good thing. You have very, very exquisite platforms that some offerers are either thinking up or actually experimenting with. And you have some that are on the lower cost side, and they tend to do one or two things well. And then you have the question of range. You have the question of speed. You have the question of what weapons capacity or what SWAP. For those of you who are on the engineering side know that SWAP-C is a limiter for what we do in the air. And so there's this idea that there's a lot of different variables that are out there. What the Secretary is worried about is that if we don't change the way that we go forward, we're going to have an unaffordable Air Force. And so we are asking for what our offerers might be able to do with producing combat capability at a lower price point by using autonomy. We don't know what answers we're going to get. Now, we're starting to get some really interesting answers, just honestly, and we're going to be able to back brief you on some of those here as we go forward. But there is a wide open space right now in this part of the defense world, and it's really exciting. But it's clear that one of the things the Secretary is trying to do is get us off of the asymptotic price increases in things like bombers and fighters. And that's a really important thing for us going forward. It's really important for the taxpayers so we get the most value.
Yeah, yep. What a great pitch. Thank you so much for being here.